In this video, I'm going to solve a problem using a loop, and this is going to be in particular kind of a data entry type of a loop, the type of setup we might use to validate somebody's input. In other words, if we're asking somebody for a password, for example, and we want to keep asking until they get it right, or if we want to, make sure they're typing in the month from 1 to 12, and we want to make sure they enter a valid number and they don't type in -4 or 23 for the month number. We can set up a loop that asks what we're looking for and checks it, and then if it's not what we want, we can repeat it. And this is going to be a little variation on that, because what this one's going to do is display a message saying type in an even number or type 999 to exit. And when the user types in a number, we're going to take a look at it. If they have successfully typed in an even number, we'll output a message to that effect. And if they've typed in an odd number, we will notify them of that. And if they have typed in 999, then the program will stop running. So it's definitely this idea of repeating data entry and examining what we get from the user every time. So, as always, this is a good place to stop the video and take a shot at it yourself, see what you come up with, and then hit play to see my solution. All right, so let's jump over to our IDE and take a look at this problem. I didn't set this one up ahead of time here, so let me. I will not make you watch as I type all this. I'm just going to type some header information, and I will set up my main method. So I'll kind of fast forward through that part. All right, and so I'm going to use, I'm going to make this a console application. I'm just going to use the scanner class to get user input. You could also choose to do this with, with a GUI user interface and use, use dialog boxes or whatever. I'm just going to use the scanner class. So, so I've got my import statement there. And with loop problems, the first thing that we need to do is decide what kind of loop structure we're going to use. And again, we will look at these in two very broad categories. There's the kind of loop where we know how many times it's going to have to execute before it starts executing. So if we write a loop that's going to count from 1 to 10, we know that it has to execute 10 times. In this case, we don't know when the loop starts how many times it's going to have to run. It's going to have to keep running until some condition is met that will depend on the user. We're going to have to keep running until the user enters 999, and so we call this an indefinite loop. And this is again typical of input types of loops or input validation, that kind of thing. So I am going to start off by creating a variable to hold the user input. And I'm going to just call it input. And actually I'm going to need a scanner object here too before I forget. Scanner, I'll just call it in equals new scanner system.in. But I'm going to make this input variable that's going to hold whatever integer the user is typing in. And I like to set up just as a rule my local variables with initialized values. Or I like to initialize them with values, I should say. And partly that's just my habit, so that I make sure I always initialize my variables, but it is going to play into how I set up my loop. And so I'm putting in -1 because that is a value that is clearly, or at least clear to me, it's clear to me that it's not what the user has typed in. It's kind of it's a good default value, because if I run this and I see -1 anywhere, then I can probably trace that back to this initialization, and I can debug from there. So that's kind of a common convention among programmers, I guess. But what I'm going to do here, I'm going to use a while loop, even though a do while loop might be a better fit for this. And with beginning programmers in particular, I tend to just focus on while loops, and in part because the structure of it looks so similar to if statements that we're used to. And so, for example, if we consider this if statement, if the input that the user has typed in is not equal to 999, then I want to ask them to enter some input on my prompt and all that stuff. And so that's just a pretty straightforward if statement. If input is not equal to 999, then we're going to run this code. Well, a while loop is essentially an if statement that repeats. And so if I change if to while, it says while the input is not equal to 999, then you'll run this code block. At the end of the code block, it's going to jump back up here. It's going to take another look at the Boolean condition. Is it if it's not equal to 999, it's going to run the code again. And as long as every time it pops back up here, it's going to check that again. If the condition is true, it's going to run the code. As soon as that condition is not true, it's going to jump down. It's going to skip the code block and jump down to, in this case, line 24, and execution will resume from there. So this fits well, and it's a real easy structure for students to get the hang of. Conceptually, I want to acknowledge that a do-while loop is probably a better fit for this, because the difference is with a do-while loop, we're going to run the code first, and then we're going to check the condition at the end, and that would seem to be a good fit for this, where we're going to get some input from the user and do whatever we need to do with it, and then we're going to look at that input and see, well, if it was 999, then we don't need to repeat if it was anything else we do. So either one is fine, and unless you are directly told that you need to use one or the other, then as far as I'm concerned, you can do it however you want. So I typically will say, by the way, that anything you can do with for loop, you can also do with a while loop, and vice versa. And that's certainly the case. This, and even though you could do it, this is not a very good fit for a for loop, because we don't know how many times it's going to have to execute, and then you get into how do we break out of a for loop, and certainly you can do that. I and probably a lot of other programmers consider that sort of poor style, so to speak. It's not really wrong. It just doesn't seem right, and there are plenty of people out there who disagree with me. I just don't. I would rather not break out of my loops in that way. I would rather set my loop up to run the appropriate number of times. So whatever. That's my little side note on that. So let's get back to the problem at hand here. So we want to prompt the user. Once again, I'm losing my train of thought here. So what I've done intentionally, but you may not have noticed, is I initialized my input to -1, and so now the first time this executes, when I first run the program, this gets set to -1. It takes a look and says, is -1, if -1 is not equal to 999, then execute. So I'm setting it up so that it runs the first time no matter what. If I were to do that, then this loop would never run, right? So it's another reason to initialize our variable in that manner. Okay, so I'm going to prompt the user, system.out.println, enter an even number or 999 to exit. And I'll change this actually to a print rather than a print line so that the cursor stays there. And now I'm going to just say input equals in being my scanner object up there, and I'm gonna want the next int that the user types in. Okay. Now we might as well test it at this point and just see what it does. Oops, I've got to save it first. Okay, and so hard to see with that small font down there, but it is prompting me. And if I type in, we've got this error that this is an ongoing thing that we haven't learned to address yet, that if we type in text, the user can break our program, and that's something we just have to live with for now. If I type in 4, it just prompts me again, type in another number, type in, I'll try an odd, and everything seems I mean, it seems okay. There's nothing wrong. It's not really doing anything as far as we can tell. But if I type in 999, the program does indeed stop. So this is a good start. We've got it prompting the user. We are getting some input, and then we're looping back and checking that input. If it's 999, we're breaking out. If it's anything else, we just keep asking. So this is a good basic setup for our loop. And so all that's left is to take a look at what they've and I should point out, maybe this is really this is kind of the meat of the problem. This is what in a unit on, a module on loops, this is the part that we care about, is do you understand how to set this up? The rest is just kind of window dressing. We're going to take a look now and see, did they actually type in an even number, or did they type in an odd number? But that's not, that's just that just happens to be what this program is asking for. That's not really related to the loop itself. Now, testing for, one of the reasons I like this problem is because it's this is a good little trick to have up your sleeve, so to speak, that it is nice to know how to test if a number is even or odd. So I'm just going to say if input mod 2 is equal to 0. So what that does, if you'll remember what the modulus operator does, it does division, but it gives us the remainder instead of the quotient. And so if you mod something by 2, if it's an even number, the answer is 0. If you get 1, that means you're looking at an odd number. So that's it's a real straightforward and reliable way to check to see if a number is even. And so I don't remember what the exact message was. I think the problem said I'm supposed to say good job or something. There we go. So good job. Good job. And then otherwise, we are just going to output some message to let them know it's not a negative number. So let's run it again, see what we got. Oops, I must have a typo in there somewhere. Oh, I think I just didn't stop my program that was running before, so let's try it and see if it works. I don't see any obvious errors up there. So if I type in an even number, sorry, let me correct these little mistakes I'm messing up here. Okay, I typed in 4, it said good job. If I type in 3, that's not a negative number. We can try a few different test cases. This is a pretty straightforward one. I mean, it's either going to work or it isn't. I trust my my little test here for odd and even. And then when I'm done, I want to type in 999 and the program exits. So this problem is complete. I'll kind of clean it up here so you can see my solution all at once, but other than that, we are finished.